right, so we are going to start painting the plants today. Now, everybody should have, I gave you guys all some colors, and this is what I gave you. All right, so in this first well, that is indigo blue, so that's the darkest blue that we have. The second well is filled in with ultramarine blue. The third one is filled in with viridian green, which is kind of like a blue-green. Then we have sap green, which is kind of middle of the road green, and then we have lemon yellow. Now, a lot of you guys, and you can even see on my painting, on my reference that I'm working off of here, is that my plants aren't just green. I do have some other colors in here, actually some reds, maybe even some more kind of like neutral yellows. Those will happen later. For right now, for most of us, we have green in at least all three of our plants. Okay, so we're going to deal with that first, and then we'll deal with those other colors a little bit later. Okay, so whenever you are dealing with an object that has a secondary color to it, so secondary colors would be your oranges, your greens, and your violets. Okay, there's three of them. For us, we're dealing with green. What two primary colors make green? Who wants to answer that question? Yes, so blue and yellow are the two primary colors that you mix together to make green. So whenever I am painting or drawing something that has a secondary color to it, I always have those two primary colors that make it on my palette. So for me, the indigo blue and the ultramarine blue I'm going to use to darken up my greens. Okay? And then I have my greens right here, and then I'm going to use yellow, the other primary color that makes green, to lighten it. Okay? So that's why you have blue and yellow and green on your palette right now. You're going to use the blue to darken and the yellow to lighten it. Okay? So what I'm going to do just to start, I'm going to, I need to move some of this stuff around a little bit. I'm going to start by putting about 3 or 4 brushfuls of water into my paint well to keep these piles of paint wet. I do not want these to dry up. If you leave your palette for a few days, the water is going to evaporate. Okay, so this is something that you're not going to just do every once in a while. This is something you need to do every day. Every day you're at least in class. Okay, so I'm putting just enough water in here to surround that pile of paint that I have and to keep it wet. And I'm finding that about 3 or 4 brushfuls kind of does the trick. I think more like 4. So I'm going to do that to each one of these. And then as I use these colors, I'm going to be using up that water. I'm going to have to probably add more to it later. Okay, so this is something you have to be consciously aware of as you work and paint. Okay, so I'm going to kind of try to find a way to do this. I need more room. Another little thing you want to make sure that you guys do, okay, always put that cap that was on your brush in your bag. Don't put it at your table. If you put it on your desk or on your table, I guarantee you, you're going to lose it. That thing's going to roll off and you'll never find it again. Okay. So if you guys remember, and I'm going to start again with the plant that's in the foreground. We did this little study, okay? So I want you guys to have that out and open and next to you so you can have that as a reference. For me, I'm just going to kind of prop it up here next to me so I have that reference, okay? So you want this out, okay? Because this is going to be kind of like your little map that you're at least going to follow for this front plant, okay? Now remember the difference between painting on wet versus dry paper, okay? That is the secret to watercolor paint. Moving this up around. Okay, so the secret to watercolor paint, again, is knowing when to paint on wet versus dry paper, okay? Now, if you look at these leaves, do these leaves blend together? What's the answer? Do they blend together? They do? We have separate leaves. Okay, so I want this leaf to stay separate from this leaf. I want this leaf to stay separate from here. So I'm not going to, so when I'm painting this, I'm not going to necessarily be painting two leaves that are next to each other. Because if I paint two leaves at the same time that are next to each other, they're going to blend into each other. So that's something I need to be consciously aware of, okay? So what I'm going to do first for my particular plant is I'm going to go ahead, and you can do this a bunch of different ways. I'm just going to start by kind of adding in my lightest places first, okay? And my lightest areas kind of look like almost like a really yellow-green. So I'm going to start by mixing that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start by just kind of mixing up a good yellow-green. Now remember, when you're creating your colors, you want to grab your paint from the side of the pile. Don't scoop it up from the middle. So I'm just going to add, or start off with a little bit of yellow. I'm going to wash my brush off here. And then I'm going to go ahead, because I'm making like a yellow-green, I'm going to go ahead and take my lightest green, which is the sap green, and I'm going to just add a little bit of that to this. And that looks too green to me. So I'm probably not going to use that. There. That's better. I need more yellow in it. Now I'm not going to necessarily, for this particular color, I'm not going to necessarily go for something that's really washed out. If you're not sure about what this color looks like, you can always test it out on your sketchbook just to see what it looks like. And I think I like that. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and paint that wherever I see this light green. And I'm painting right on top of dry paper. Okay, painting right on top of dry paper. I'm going to go ahead and kind of wash my brush off. And I'm just going to kind of blend that out so that it does blend out to the other colors when I do add them on there. And I'm going to do that wherever I see this kind of yellow-green. I'm going to try to move this over so you guys can kind of see what I'm looking at here. Now this really light value that I have here is not going to, I'm not going to find this anywhere where they touch. So I'm not going to be worried about anything blending together right now. Now you could, if you wanted to, you could start with your darkest areas first if you wanted to. Totally up to you. Once we kind of get this first sort of plant started, that'll be enough for you to know exactly what you need to do for the other ones. So again, I'm just kind of putting this wherever I see it. And And again, you have to be, just like always, you have to be conscious about where your light's coming from. That's your job as a painter and a drawer, as an artist, is to give your audience the impression that you know where your light's coming from. I'm just painting this wherever I see it, touching these leaves. And where needed, I will blend it out, but in some areas I don't need to blend it out. Some of these have more than others. And some don't have any. And then if I run out of this paint, I'll just make up some more. Okay, so I've got my yellow, or my kind of lime green.
Yeah, I do use her real quick.
So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to just kind of keep working towards darker colors. So now I'm going to kind of make kind of like a middle value, what I consider be a middle value. Try to put this all. This time I'm going to start with sap green for my middle value. Might add a little bit of yellow to this, not much. Again, I always like to test out my colors before I use them. I think I'll make that just a little bit darker. And as you can see, I'm not mixing much. I'm not mixing a lot at all. Now if I run out, I can always make more. That looks better. And so what I'm going to do is essentially go back to the beginning of my painting. So I started up here. Now that I feel it, so you're going to always be constantly feeling and touching your painting. This is dry, so I can go back over it. So remember, watercolor paint's going to go wherever the water is. Actually, see, I missed an area here. There we go. Ah, missed that one too. I'm finding areas that I missed. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead now. I'm going to go back to this. And start adding in my middle value. And again, if you don't know where to put this, your answer, you got a couple references. You've got that tracing that you made, and you also have your still life in front of you. And so I've got that down. I need this to blend out a little bit. So anytime I need stuff to blend, I'm going to clean my brush off. Take a nice clean brush with some water on it, and I'm just going to kind of paint over this area to let it blend. And there I go. Got rid of that line. Now remember, when I'm painting, and I said this the other day, when I paint on watercolor paper, I'm not pushing hard into the paper. I'm very gentle with it. So I'm not pressing my brush really hard into the paper, because once your paper is wet, it's getting weaker. It's fragile. So if you really dig your brush into your paper, you're going to probably pill it up. So be careful with that. So once I get one, then I'm going to go ahead and move on to another one. And again, I need to be aware of what's wet and what's dry. And I'm just going to kind of lay that color down and then move on. I don't want to beat up the paper, and I don't want to, dig out or beat up my paint. So I kind of get it down, and then I let it go and move on to something else. Make up some more paint. So I'm just going to kind of keep treating it like this. So once I get all my medium values down, then I'm going to then start in on my darks. And where areas need to blend, I'll just go back over it with a wet, clean brush. This is the other thing that's really nice about watercolor paint, is you really don't need much to create a painting. So that's why the tubes are always pretty small. Watercolor paint, a little bit of watercolor paint goes a long way. So if you're not sure, again, if you can paint in an area, use your fingers and touch your paper to see if it's dry. The other thing is, too, just so you guys know, every time I mix up a new batch of paint, I don't get too concerned with making the same batch again. In fact, I kind of gave up on trying to remix and match my mixtures because I decided it was impossible, and instead embrace the fact that every time I mix up a new batch of color, it's different, and use that to my advantage. So I think, you know, when you mix up your paint and it's sort of a little different than first time you did it, that's fine. It's going to give your painting a bit more of a variation and interest. So I try to look at it as a good thing. So I'm just going to go through and keep trying to map these out. And I'm doing this all with the number 6 brush. Finding that this is it's working out pretty good. I don't need that small, that really tiny one yet. Who knows if I'll use it? I may not. Almost done here with this medium value. Some of the ones that I'm leaving back over here on this side that haven't been painted are going to be pretty dark, so. Okay. So my next step is going to be to add in my darker values. Start doing that, but right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of pause this and I'm going to come around and kind of take a look at what you guys are doing, and then when I come back around we'll start that. I'm just going to do a little bit more on this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to try to add some contrast to this. Now will it be done? Absolutely not. But I want to get it so that you can at least see how I can establish, you know, 3, 4, 5 values. And then ideally the next step would be for me to just kind of let this dry and maybe perhaps go and work on another one. But I probably won't get the chance to do that. Let's see here. All right, so I'm going to grab, since I'm making, I want a darker green, I'm going to grab the Viridian green, which is darker. It's kind of like a blue-green, so it already has some blue in it. And then I want to add just a little bit more blue to it, so I'm going to add some of this ultramarine blue, because that's how you're going to darken up your green. A lot of times people think if you need to darken up a color, you need to add black to it, but if you add black to a color, make sure to make it dark, you're going to gray it out. I don't want a gray green. I want a dark green. So to make it a dark green, I'm going to add blue. So I'm going to, again, test this out on my sketchbook. Okay. And then I'm going to find all those areas. I'm going to use my hand to kind of touch my paper to figure out where things are wet and where they are dry. And I'm just going to start now and add this dark in here, this dark green. Now, this is not going to be the darkest green I'm going to have. I will definitely be getting darker. But I'm just going to kind of lay this down where I want it. Okay, so you can see what that looks like right at the beginning. And then I do need it to kind of blend out, so I'm going to wash off my brush. And just kind of take that along this edge and just encourage it to kind of blend out. actually need to add a little bit more. And then sometimes too, I need to add a little bit more of my medium back on here. So I feel like I'm kind of moving too much or kind of taking away too much. So I'm just going to add a little bit in here. There. Again, I don't want to play with this too much because if I play around with it too much, I'm probably going to overdo it. You definitely need to just kind of get your paint down with watercolors and then let it go. Give it time to rest, give it time to kind of settle, and then you can go back and play around with it. But if you notice that, you know, when you're working on it and you're kind of taking up paint rather than leaving paint, then chances are you probably need to just give it a break. Alright, I'm going to stop playing around with that guy. Now remember, I don't want to work in any area next to that because then it's just going to bleed into each other. So I'm going to go somewhere else where I know the paper is dry. Go in and work on this. Once I get that, then I'm going to move on to, again, another dry area. Got some spots here that are pretty dark. And again, when I'm working on some of these areas that I need to be really kind of defined, I need to make sure that I'm working on dry paper. And some of these dark areas are almost looking a little too blue for my painting, and I can go in and fix that later. I just need to get this down. And again, I'm in an area where I need this to kind of blend out, so I'm using a clean, wet brush. And just very gently using my brush to kind of drag this down. Remember, you cannot push. You got to be really gentle with your brush and the paper. When that paper's wet, it's fragile. So you don't want to beat up that paper too much. I think I need a little bit more. I'm very much moving all around my painting. I'm not sticking around and messing around with one single leaf for too long. I don't want to because I will overwork it. So with watercolors, you definitely have to treat them a lot different than acrylics. You know, with acrylics, you can work anywhere you want, whenever you want. With watercolor, you cannot do that. You got to be very mindful of what you're doing. You have to be a little bit sort of methodical about where you're painting and how you're painting. So it takes a lot of forethought. Kind of have to plan it. So hopefully by now you guys have a pretty good idea of what you can and can't do with this. Again, check out your piles of paint. Do you need to add some more water to them? You want to make sure that they're not drying out on you. When you feel like you're ready to move on to another plant, by all means, you can go ahead and do that. I've got a lot of leaves here on this guy, so this guy's going to take me a little bit of time. again, you should be able to see at least 3 different values on each one of these leaves. I know several of you guys have some plants that have some warmer colors on there. You can definitely use that red that we used for the construction paper for part of that. I do have some other colors also too, like some violets that might interest you too. Alright, so I'm going to stop right there for just a minute. I'm going to pause this. So now that we got this started, I'm going to let you guys go to continue to work on the other 2 plants, get those started. Remember, you should be able to identify very easily, you know, I'd say at least 3 to 4 values on your plant right from the very beginning. And if you don't, you got some things you got to fix. So, on to the next.